The dust of fuel subsidy removal is yet to settle in Nigeria after the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation Limited directed its retail stations to jack up the price of fuel per litre from 197 naira to between 488 naira and 570 naira. After some back and forth, labor unions have suspended their planned strike action, slated to commence tomorrow, over the scrapping of fuel subsidy by the federal government. It follows talks between government officials and organized labor representatives in Abuja. Earlier, the National Industrial Court of Nigeria in Abuja ordered the Nigerian Labour Congress and the Trade Union Congress to halt the strike they plan to embark on in protest against the removal of subsidy from petroleum motor spirit. The presiding judge, Olufunke Anuwe, in a ruling, restrained the NLC and the Trade Union Congress, the respondents in the case, from embarking on the planned strike action, which is expected to commence on Wednesday, the 7th of June. Joining us now on this show to discuss the issues raised by the removal of fuel subsidy is Gbolahan Olojede, a policy analyst and former lead public policy analyst in support of the Federal Ministry of Works and Housing's Highway Development and Management Initiative. Good morning, Mr. Olojede. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning, Dr. Abati. Good morning.
Straightforward question. Are we out of the woods yet? Everyone thought by tomorrow, maybe there will be chaos, unlimited. But now we seem to have been told that, well, with the court ruling, with the meeting yesterday with organized labor, now organized labor has suspended its strike. We saw Gbajabiamila, the Speaker of the House of Reps and Chief of Staff to the President, reading out a number of agreements. How much hope should we attach to that?
Well, the hope that we have right there is the opportunity to continue the engagement. And in the course of the engagement, we also have a window of opportunity to continue on the side of citizens' education around subsidy. Subsidy, especially PMS subsidy, is something that everybody likes to discuss. The reason is not because the understanding of that space is that pervasive. The reason is because everybody uses one way or the other that product. So there is definitely a citizens' education gap somewhere right there, which this window of time that the federal government has, it can leverage that window to do a bit of citizens' education and continue the necessary engagement that will be required for a smooth implementation.
All right. I'm very glad that you talked about citizen engagement, which a number of people have criticized the government for not managing effectively initially. I believe that it's improved in terms of engagement and information, but I'd like you to expound on that. What should citizen engagement look like? Because I believe the government could use some recommendation from you as an expert, because one of the things with regards to policy formation and change in policy, especially for Nigeria and Nigerians, is that there's usually not enough information. There's usually not enough citizen engagement. And so people are left in the dark, and this gives room for speculations, rumors, lies, twisting of facts and the likes. What should citizen engagement look like going forward?
Okay, most of the solutions that we are looking for are already being thrown around in the space. One thing that we can largely agree on is that more Nigerians, maybe in recent history, agree that we should do away with subsidy. But there is a concern that when you do away with subsidy, it will leave in its trail certain pains. And how do you confront those issues? So the emphasis of citizens' education should focus on those concerns that the citizens have. Issues about alternative energy is out there. So some people are saying, how about we try CNG? Because it's been found to be more cost-effective when it comes to running things. Is this something we should consider? People are also curious about how the 30,000 naira take-home will take a segment of the workforce home. So issues around where is the tax issues, exemptions relating to people at the lowest rung of the ladder. Where do you take that cutoff? Should it remain at 30,000? Should you move to 50 or 60,000? So issues around review of minimum wage is already on the table as well. Then we have to also take it further into specific intervention. Now, people have criticized the issue of, oh, I want to give you 5,000 naira and all of that, you know. And at the heart of that criticism is the fact that we're not even sure of the database. Do we want to validate that database? Can it be done? The answer is yes. If today you want to validate that database, we can do it. There are also elements of certain structures that could be leveraged on for passing on subsidy without distributing cash. I'll give you an example. In Lagos State, you have a BRT system. If this palliative were to happen in London, for example, you just call Transport for London, which is the owner of the underground, and say, look, this is going to affect transportation costs, but I don't want you to increase the transport fare commensurably. Therefore, take this and keep the transport costs at a certain level. We don't have that kind of a structure. The small semblance we have, say in Lagos State, will be something like the BRT. Can we also leverage it? Can we leverage other structures around that? We must necessarily invest in public transportation and transport infrastructure as part of the gains we propose to make from removing subsidy. And people must have a clear plan as to how we intend to achieve that.
So what has happened over the last 1 week or so? This is when the president was sworn in.
May 29.
On May 29.
6th.
May 6th. Look at the number of days, and it feels like he's been in office forever.
7 days.
It looks like he's been in office forever. So help us understand, if you were to gauge as a policy expert, looking at what the president has done with his team over the last few days, how do you rate them? And giving them that rating, what do you think they can do to make things better? Because a lot of people are criticizing the way they have handled, first, the announcement, secondly, the management of the relationship with Labour and the rest of it, and thirdly, a lot of people are saying the president is not even involved in the conversation. And we know what has happened in the past. If president of Nigeria is saying this is what we want and Labour Union, go do it, and other people are speaking for him, and he's not part of that conversation, the government finds ways to wriggle out of it. And Labour Union in Nigeria, they're very savvy. They understand that this happens. So help us understand.
Well, here is it. I'm not so sure we can say there is a team already, at least when it started off. It didn't even have a spokesperson when it started off, no chief of staff. So the communication at the onset was not where it should be. Over the last few days, it has picked up. I've started seeing jingles, I've started hearing jingles, I've started seeing things in the newspapers. The engagement has been more robust. I've seen NNPC, GMD going to television stations. So there is no doubt that the communication is starting to pick up better space, which is something we must sustain. In my opinion, too, I would have loved for the president to step up on the issue of actually having cabinet. You see, when you're talking of a technical space like subsidy, you also need people who are in your cabinet who will be anchoring those issues to be out there speaking to the people. And people have a respect for them, so they listen to them. I'm sorry to say this. I don't think that the level of trust that people have in NNPC itself is high enough. NNPC must continue to speak. But citizens will rather also listen to someone else that is not NNPC in a matter like this. So getting that right team out there, it has to be faster than we have seen in previous history.
Okay, I don't agree that it looks like the president has been there forever. With the promises we were given that he will hit the ground running, by now we expect him to be moving even faster. I think the pace is sluggish. So don't let us twist the story and say, oh, it looks like he's been there forever. No, he has not even started. But let me ask you about the second issue that was raised by Jabi Amila in the communique that was read out, or was it the third point, about this conversion to natural gas, compressed natural gas.
CNG, yeah.
Yeah. which Joe Ajero talked about on this station on Sunday, which also came up at the end of the meeting yesterday. Now, how feasible is that? It was first proposed in 2021 by the Minister of State at the time for Petroleum, Timipre Silva.
Yes.
Now we're being told that it will be reviewed, it will be implemented. How many Nigerians can retrofit their petrol vehicles to take on CNG? Who is going to pay for it? The average cost, depending on the model of your vehicle, is between $15,000 to $60,000. Okay, how many of us on this table can bring out $50,000? $50,000 to say, oh, help me change my car to CNG so that I can be using gas. If you look at the cost of gas, 1 kg of gas is 700 naira. So what is all this nebulous talk about, if we adopt CNG and all of that? That's why I said earlier on, most of those recommendations, they don't look like they are immediately feasible things.
Yeah,
what do you think?
Dr. Abati, it's not an immediately feasible thing. You're
so
perfectly right to it.
We'll be paying this high price for PMS for like the next 2 years.
Here is it though. It's something we must look at. But we cannot jump into it and say, start rolling out the infrastructure for CNG right now or start. No. Where it starts from is a proper study. In the US, for example, I think it was a Honda Civic that was, CNG that was launched then. It didn't catch on in the US. We must find out why it didn't work, where it didn't work. If there are other societies where it worked, we need to find out why did it work in this society and not in the other one. And then adapt that to our own society to see if this is a viable alternative energy strategy. There's nothing that should be left off the table, in my opinion. So it's something we should look at, but it's not something that you can snap your finger and get CNG vehicle running on the Lagos street immediately. It won't happen, but it could be considered along the line.
All right, so considered along the line, despite the costs and despite the fact that it hasn't worked, even in Nigeria. Let's not go too far to the US. Even in Nigeria, since, like Doctor had mentioned, 2021, the aim was 1 million cars.
I think we tried, it was LPG was meant to be. But LPG, CNG, they're still alternative energy strategy, and it has not been.
It hasn't worked. So, I mean, like you mentioned, perhaps to investigate why it wasn't successful and see how, lessons we can learn from that. But let me talk about another point it mentioned, and that's the Speaker of the House and Chief of Staff, which is here now, Doctor.
It's both.
He's both.
He's both until next week. All right. So with what he said and the World Bank Finance Cash Transfer Scheme, and to ensure that the lowest income earners would be absorbed under this scheme, you have already talked about the Social Intervention Register and validating that. But in terms of going forward, I'd said earlier that what Nigerians want to hear, have your meetings and all that, we want to hear how...
What is the need for me?
What's the need for me? How will my life be impacted? Because you're saying, and there's a case for it, that fuel subsidy has to go. So how do we then cushion the effect for Nigerians? How do we interpret this? Because that's what we want to hear from meetings like this with organized labor and the federal government. In the next few days, what should we see begin to happen? Some people have not been able to send their children to school because of transportation costs. Some people have not been able to go to the market physically, those who are petty traders. And you must understand that a large majority of Nigerians are in the informal sector. So they don't have a salary, monthly. Even those who are on salary, we talk about minimum wage, are not able to afford the new reality. In the next few days, what should we see happen?
There are certain adjustments that are already happening. In the papers today, you see Kwara State government asking certain categories of workers to only come 3 days in a week. Yes. That is an adjustment. In my office, where I work, we work 2 days virtually from home.
You don't mention one state, one private organization.
This is how it starts. Because it's going to be a situation in which government and the people will meet somewhere midway. So people will make some adjustment, government will meet them along the line, and we can have a semblance of a smooth implementation. Don't forget, in previous years in which we backtracked, OBJ actually did a removal at some point. but he let it just run, and we didn't sustain it. Jonathan did the same. The popular 2012 one, that one is the overt one. And we saw when we backtracked, in fact, we are picking it up 13 years or 11 years after. So the issue of backtracking should be totally off our page, and we should zero in on those solutions. So issues of wages, can we begin to zero in on wages? It's a very fairly complex place, because we tend to pull out figures from under our hat and decide that this is what should be the minimum wage in Nigeria. There are no empirical variables that are plugged into how we arrive at what should be minimum wage in Nigeria, and a few others. So those interventions have to be concrete, and people need to begin to feel it. If you want to validate data of poor people, let's go ahead and do it. If we don't validate it, Nigeria will not even trust it. And they have a basis. 50% of the money could easily go into the wrong pockets. But validate that, pass it on. I've mentioned how places like Lagos, though not pervasive enough, that have a semblance of a tiny structure of transport infrastructure, can pass on some subsidy across to the BRT system.
Is that not subsidy substituting subsidy?
Because it's a soft landing we're looking at now, and it thins out. It thins out.
Okay, I was having a very interesting conversation very early this morning with a friend. We went to Federal Government College, Kano together, and we were talking about every Nigerian seemed to know the solution to Nigeria's problems. And he said that you find people who sit as spectators and watch Manchester City, and they seem to know better than Pep Guardiola.
Correct.
They have all the solutions. And that's the same situation we have in Nigeria today. Yeah. We are sitting down and we're thinking, the president, just like Olisa Agbakoba said, as a Tuesday, he said by Tuesday, 6 p.m., the president should have announced his cabinet, or at least make a profound pronouncement on those who are members of his cabinet. Well, today's Tuesday is exactly 1 week ago. We haven't seen that happen. Ruben said that you don't accept that he's been there forever. 8 days in the lives of Nigerians that have been impoverished, that have lost their jobs, that are on the verge of committing suicide. Today, it feels like a lifetime for them. We have a massive problem on our hands. So my question will be, shouldn't the president make it top priority to announce his government? You will help us understand what that will impact, how that will impact the situation now. Shouldn't the president be looking at consulting governors and asking every single one of them to come to Abuja? Let's sit down and let's make this a solution that drills down, not just the upper level kind of thing. What are the other solutions that this government, listening to us, should be working on?
I think the government is already engaging, even across political divide. So there was the meeting with Wike, Makinde, and all the other people. And I believe it's all around subsidy.
Political conversation is not
whether political or not, if those people can hold it down in their state and align with the thinking of the president, it helps a great deal. But the cabinet, in my opinion, too, we need to move faster. I don't believe we need 36 people on the floor on day one of that cabinet. I think we can choose and say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 are so critical that I need you to hit the ground running like now, and get those ones in place while we think through how the remaining 31 or whatever number we have been asked to put together will come on board. So I agree with you on that. We need to move faster than we are moving.
We are not reinventing the wheel.
Correct.
In Japan, when a new prime minister gets in there, the following day he announces his cabinet. Mm-hmm. We saw it also in the United Kingdom. So all this talk about consultations in putting a team together is completely, beside the point.
3-month consultation would have been fine anyway.
Well, we had 6 months at a time. It took us 6 months. There was one governor once upon a time in this country that didn't have an executive cabinet for more than a whole year. He said
I know.
He was still studying the situation. So that's the kind of deficit in terms of leadership that you get in this country. We should not encourage it. Now, I wanted to ask you, one of the major issues in this conversation has been about national minimum wage. The last time we had the new national minimum wage, the tripartite consultation that they are talking about was the same thing that the Buhari administration attempted. The thing went on endlessly. with the governors quarreling with the private sector, with the private sector quarreling with the government, everybody saying we don't have the money. Up to now, that same pill, that same medicine has not solved any problem because many of the states are owing salary arrears. And they are saying, like Dario Fo, we won't pay, we can't pay. That's a play written by Dario Fo. We won't pay, we can't pay. So what is the guarantee that this tripartite committee on new national minimum wage will work? Can Nigeria afford, can the states afford to pay 200,000 naira per month?
Okay.
Because if they pay 200,000 naira per month, by the time you prorate it, some of us will ask for...
You know how many millions we're talking about.
Don't let me make a demand on television.
I will start from where part of this question. He had wondered whether there's enough consultation with the governors. The governors have a strong stake there. This is something that has affected the amount distributed to the governors over the years. So it is something that they are committed to. It was never in doubt that the governors will support, but it goes beyond the governors. Now, Doctor was talking about minimum wage. The way we have approached minimum wage in Nigeria requires a totally different discussion or an approach. Number one is we don't have a timing for it, so there's no saying that after this much we will sit down and discuss what should be the minimum wage. Number two, we seem to pull figure from under the hat. How do we arrive at what should be minimum wage in Nigeria? What are the variables that are plugged in to arrive at what should be that? I don't think it exists. The nature, the way that we even structure our jobs. So there is, you have a government cleaner, for example. By 9 a.m. in the morning, he's done with the job for the day. He sits around till 4 p.m. and goes home. And we say he's on salary. What kind of a salary is that? What society pay people for gisting under the staircase for 7 hours? You cut them loose after they're done with the job. They can use the hours for more productive activities. We also have issues around, is the cost of living in Taraba the same as Lagos? Is Lagos the same as Yusufari or Shagari Village? It is not. So we need more robustness in how we even approach the issue of minimum wage, totally. And I'm hoping that we can use this opportunity to begin to have more structured discussions around that subject matter, rather than just waking up and say, 30,000, okay, give me 200,000. It doesn't work. It's not going to work. Yeah.
Okay, on that, I know that legally there might not be a provision for that, but do you think it's time for state governors to determine the minimum wage? Because, I mean, of course, that would go through its process, but... Yeah. As you've talked about that, as Dr. Abati had mentioned, one of the issues we've had is that when it's set at federal level, state governors struggle with even being able to pay for it. We look at IGR, we look at how much the state is making, we look at what they are able to do. And then it could perhaps drive competition as well. But that aside, when you talk about minimum wage, we also have to look at another question that has come up is cost of governance. So if you're going to talk about the staff who goes to work in the morning and just clocks in but spends the rest of the day selling shoes or something else, we must talk about cost of governance and the fact that if the people have to bear the brunt of fuel subsidy removal, it has to be reflected in the way that government is run. We have to see a reduction, and that hasn't really come up. That is like do not touch. We've been talking about a lot of adjustments and things, but I didn't see in the 7-point agenda that they were going to talk about cost of governance and how that would go. I wish that had come up as well in that negotiation meeting. Maybe the next meeting they have, they can discuss that. What areas do you think should be looked into? Immediate wins in terms of cost. We already have the Ronsari report. And so we already have recommendations in that regard, but what should they begin to do, quick wins, to cut the cost of governance? A
lot of wastages out there. Coming out of my house early in the morning, 6 a.m., I saw people going to the airport some weeks ago. And the number of vehicles in that entourage, including coastal buses, will embarrass anybody. And you ask yourself, are they trying to carry these coastal buses into the air? Or why did they all have to be there? So the mentality has to totally change. And the only way to change that is from the very top. It is a tone that the very top sets that will impact on how the followership will adopt issues of cost consciousness and, curbing wastage. And there's also the corruption. Apart from waste, there's also corruption. Corruption is when we start saying there's no money, and you hear stories about somebody taking 22 billion, Accountant General, in issues around some 89 billion, So all those issues also have to be addressed. The people don't want to be told to just tighten your belt. They're also saying, government, you too, tighten your belt. So specific issues, like you said, has to be there. But these things are not things to just be spoken about. The people want to see it in practice. And I hope the government will live up to the expectation of showing that in practice in the way it conducts itself around.
Okay. So I guess we're about to wrap up now, and the thought in my head is, as part of wrapping up this conversation, I often want to believe that policies are not plucked from the air.
Correct.
They are made out of ideas and conversation with people, and then you shape it and mold it into something that becomes tangible and impacts the lives of those who you're making it for. Now, what would you say that this government has got to do that will show that they're actually listening and then working on solution that will be fit for purpose for this nation within the last 8 days? What do you see them doing, and what would you want to see them do that will show that they do care and they're trying to make things work for Nigeria?
I think what looks like a decisiveness will work for us as a country.
Okay.
But how we manage that decisiveness is also very important. I don't think the management started well. It's only picking up space along the line. If you take that subject matter of subsidy alone, subsidy had come into this economy since 1977, thereabout. So that's over 40 years of subsidy. And nobody, military government, nobody has been able to deal with it. We must begin to confront monsters. And that is not the only one. There are several others, which he also probably mentioned in his inaugural speech. Issues around multiple exchange rates we have in Nigeria. Big issues around security. Even a couple of days ago, people were killed in issues about, for example, let me say, headers farmer problem. Do you know we've danced around that for so long? It's a problem that has been cured in several other societies. There used to be nomads, even in the Western countries, who move around. But today, they've dealt with that problem. Why do we still believe that you have to march cow from Sokoto to Lagos to come and sell? So all those are issues that have been there for a very long time that require decisiveness and attention, something to deal with it so that we stop all this unnecessary waste of lives of Nigerians, and we're also able to confront our economic issues, which has become serious.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gbolahan Olojede, for your time this morning. Policy and public affairs analyst for speaking to us further on the subsidy removal and policies around that area.